connecting to the cloud. I wonder if I can tell, you know what, I'm going to stop the share for a second. I just am too worried because people have registered. It's recording. Okay. Sorry, guys. There we go. So we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, folks. Welcome to Austin Nonprofit Meetup. I am your hostess, Nancy Manning, founder of Power Your Mission and Austin Nonprofit Meetup. For those of you who are new or who don't know me, let me give you my 30-second background. I practiced law in Rapid City, South Dakota for 25 years, while also serving on 3 nonprofit boards. I also was the founder of the only mediation and training center in Rapid City. When I moved down to Austin, I began managing nonprofits as an executive director. And then in 2014, started Power Your Mission, which is a consulting company for nonprofits. And in 2018, founded Austin Nonprofit Meetup. So I think that was a little more than 30 seconds. Okay, let me tell you something about Austin Nonprofit Meetup real quick and the reason why I started it. First of all, every month online on the 3rd Thursday of every month at 12:15 exactly, I hold these meetups and I present information and resources on the 5 focus areas of your nonprofit: communications, resource development, programs, operations, and your people, which are your board, your staff, and your volunteers. And we drill down in each one of those topics. So we've covered quite a lot of things. We've done some board development, we've done some finance issues, we've done development of communications plans, development of a volunteer program, you name it, we've done it, and we'll keep doing it because, as you know, there's a ton of things to do in nonprofits. But the other goal I had when I started Austin Nonprofit Meetup was to create a space where nonprofit leaders could collaborate and commiserate and support one another. So that's the purpose. Now, as I said, I generally present every month, but once in a while I get to entice some amazing speakers like I have today to share their wisdom and experience. Now, before I introduce these lovely folks, let me take care of just a couple of housekeeping issues very quickly. Usually Shannon Mantrum is she's from Leap to Success. She's my Zoom co-host. I don't have her. And Shannon's the one who's really good at monitoring the chat box, and I'm not good at it. So here's what we're going to do. If you wouldn't mind, is use the chat box sparingly until we get to the question answer period at the very end. And you have 2 choices for your questions. You can use the chat box at that time. Probably should put in the speaker's name if you want a specific speaker to answer your question. And I'll even direct the question to the speakers so they don't have to look at the chat box at that point. Or your other option, because you guys who know me know that I love to see you, you can turn on your videos and your microphones and ask your question that way. Somehow we have done that without talking on top of each other. So, and of course, if you're on video, you can raise your hand and I can call on you. So those are your 2 choices for asking your questions at the end. So let me go ahead and introduce our lovely speakers. Today we have Courtney Bailey, Director of Issues and Engagement at Leadership Austin. Oh, wait, you probably want to see what they look like, these lovely people. Paulina Artieda, Executive Director for the new Philanthropists, and Mickey Desai, founder of the Nonprofit Snapshot and producer of Nonprofit Snapcast podcast. That's sort of hard to say. So let's start with Courtney. Courtney, I'd like to turn it over to you, say hello to the nice people, and tell us a little bit more about yourself. And I'm going to stop my share so you can start yours.
First, Nancy, thank you for having me here. And also, how many minutes do I have to speak?
Pardon?
How many minutes do I have to speak?
Oh, you know, we're loose. I'd say at least probably 20.
Okay.
I mean,
I don't think I'll take up 20. I don't think I'll take up 20, but okay.
That's okay.
So I'm Courtney Bailey, and as Nancy said, I'm the Director of Issues and Engagement at Leadership Austin. And my role at Leadership Austin is to lead two of our flagship programs. So one is called Essential, and it's been a part of Leadership Austin for 42 years. And it is a 9-month civic leadership program that focuses on issues-based curriculum. So from healthcare, criminal justice, education, economy, and so on. And then I also lead an Engage series with Judy Maggio at Austin PBS. And again, it's issues-based. And so we recently covered the community response to disasters. Next month, we'll be talking about quality of life for the LGBTQIA+ communities, and then Asian representation in May. And so we try to address current issues, but then also topics that are very pressing and relevant to our most vulnerable community members. So that's just a little bit about me. And I have some slides that I want to share with you. So I am going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. So what I'll be talking about is diversity, equity, inclusion beyond the buzzwords and into systemic change. And so before I get into my talk, I just want to hear from a few of you all. When you hear the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, what comes up for you? And I can't see my chat box, so if anybody wants to just unmute yourself. Nothing comes up for us.
Well, can you please repeat the question for me?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so when you hear the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, what comes up for you?
Well, I'll try to spur conversation by thinking. I have a couple of thoughts that immediately come up for me. One is, I think that there are a lot of stories to tell in the pursuit of getting to a place where we can maybe stop talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that the topics themselves can be kind of uncomfortable for people to talk about because none of us want to, look at our own biases. But those are the first two things that come to mind.
Thank you, Mickey. One other person.
Thea.
I think our whole mission was based on gender equity in the music industry and how people, a lot of times it's about awareness. People aren't even aware that it's an issue. And then when they are, they're shocked and then they do want to try to do something. So I think spreading awareness is a very big deal.
Thank you. And so we all know that DEI came to the forefront last May when, and we had no choice because we were in a pandemic. So things that were happening, like Black Death, became kind of the center focus through social media. And so DEI became a thing that was on everyone's mind, right? Because we had no choice but to see it everywhere, right? And so groups started speaking out. And then once people were protesting, we got statements, right? And so this is a statement from Amazon. And I want you to focus on the second piece. So together we stand in solidarity with the Black community, our employees, customers, and partners in the fight against systemic racism and injustice. What does that mean? So when we do statements like this, what does that really mean to you? Do you know what their DEI goals are from reading this? Because we saw a lot of these in this.
This is Nancy. It doesn't mean much to me, no offense to Amazon, but when I see something like that, a big business saying something like that, I don't know what that means. We stand in solidarity. What are they doing with their policies, their initiatives, their treatment of employees, all of that? I don't know what they're doing.
Right. And so we saw a lot of those statements. And then recently, this week, you've probably seen hashtag Stop Asian Hate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we do this a lot. Something will happen, and then people, particularly now because social media is such a big tool, we'll go to social media, and then there's like this pressure. If you don't say anything, does that mean that you don't care? And all these things. But what? Then what? Like after you do that, after you make that statement, you make your social media post or what have you, now what? What's next? All right. That's what I'm curious about. What were you going to say?
This is Joshua.
Yes, Joshua.
So as you were showing that Amazon slide, and then when you asked that question, kind of what your point is now registering with me was, so why make all these statements when an incident happens? Why not either have an ongoing statement, whether that's, as Nancy said, we'll be more specific, or, even if it's just global or something ongoing on your, social media presence, or circulated every so often. Why wait till something significant, or anything for that matter, happens? And so you also raised a question that went through me personally, which was, well, does Joshua Stage as an organization, on social media say something or not with varying incidents? And to me, that would be asking our board, because I wouldn't post something on behalf of the organization without their input. So then I just thought, well, I don't want to ask, because not that I don't want to, but it was more of, well, that's what we do. We involve diversity, inclusion, and so forth. So for us to just kind of state that after an incident doesn't really resonate. I mean, we're constantly doing that.
Mhm.
Right. And thank you for saying that, Joshua. So you bring me to my next point. So when you don't have a strategy or plan or no action, you get no results, right? And then sometimes, and what you see with the statement, it's reactionary. You create a reactionary plan, a reactive action, you still have no results, because when we're reactionary, you're responding to an issue after the fact. When we are proactive, we're trying to get to the issue before a crisis arises, right? And so that's what we normally do in DEI. We're responding after the fact, never planning ahead to troubleshoot for these issues, before they happen, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so then when you do that, that's when, and I hope no one's afraid of bees, I'm sorry. That's when it becomes a buzzword, right? That's when it's like, it's just this thing that we throw out there to check a box and make sure that, no one calls us out, right? And then people get tired of hearing it. DEI. It's like, okay, we're about to go into another training. Okay. So how do we move from that to real change? And it varies from everybody, right? It varies from organization to individual, so I hope you don't come here thinking that like I'm going to give you like all the answers, because I don't have all the answers for you. But one of the big things that I've learned from my work is that meaning matters. And so understanding what diversity, equity, and inclusion means to you as an individual, but then also collectively with your organization. And is it consistent? Is it aligned? And when it's not aligned in your organization or your other spheres of influences, how do you reconcile that? Like, that's something that we have to understand. So I'll tell you how I define diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, it's not, this is just my my understanding of it. So for me, diversity celebrates differences. It lifts multiple identities from race, ethnicity, gender, religion, even your values and beliefs and perspectives, right? And then equity, that's the redistribution of power. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be equal. We always think that means same, like that it's equal. We confuse equity with equality. That means sameness. No, when you're redistributing resources and services, it doesn't mean that it's going to be the same level, but it should be fair and balanced, right? And then inclusion shows diversity in action. And it changes how we make decisions, meaning that those who are most impacted by the issues should be at the forefront, right? And now here's the thing with DEI that I feel like we get caught up on. We really move between D and I. So so for me, it should be diversity, inclusion, and equity. Equity is the hardest piece to maintain. That's the sustainability piece. We go back and forth whether in our individual lives or in organizational cultures between D and I, back and forth. And we haven't quite mastered that yet. So I'm going to bring us back to this statement, right? So what's one of the first things that groups do once they create a statement like this? What's one of the first things that you witnessed, you've seen when it comes to DEI, when you want to stand in solidarity with your employees and your customers and you're looking at your organizational makeup? What's one of the first things that folks do when it comes to like the physical representation?
When it comes to what?
Like physical representation. That's the first thing in diversity is what we see, right? And so that's how people try to address the DEI issue, right?
I don't know, Courtney, what comes to mind that I've seen after significant incidents or statements like this that you're showing. Sometimes a company will very quickly say, we now welcome our new position, diversity and inclusion officer or diversity officer. I've noticed college campuses do the same, or typically it's a new position. I haven't noticed that we're celebrating that we've had a such and such position for the last, 50 years, or this position's morphed into. Usually we've now, it's open and we just hired somebody in, 3 days or whatever the case may be.
Exactly. And so then that creates, for me, I notice this vicious cycle that happens, right? A crisis happens, whether it's Black Lives Matter, white fragility, the fear of being called out, social justice burnout, where people of color are like, look, I need y'all to step up, right? So then we go to the diversity thing. First thing, okay, we must issue an apology. We have to create this diversity role or roles, whether it's on your board or inside of your organization amongst your staff. We create trainings, right, with no real goal. We got to go to the strategic plan. And then we want these quick solutions, these quick results, to create these timelines that, how are you going to get diversity and inclusion, equity and inclusion in 6 months? Right? That's still checking the box, and groups do that. That really does happen. And then when it comes to, so you get that role, so let's say you bring in that diversity role, and then to make it even more inclusive, maybe it's a leadership role. It's the chief so-and-so, right? So it's this token leadership role with no real power, right? And you're designating all the DEI tasks to this person of color. And so they become your cleanup person, but then they also can become your fall person when things go wrong, right? And then it becomes this issue of, are they a cultural fit? And especially when it doesn't work out. And then they're having, I'll speak from my own personal experience, this issue of whether I belong, right? This issue of belonging. So like, is it me? And that's when gaslighting happens, microaggressions, all these things that perpetuate systemic inequities, institutional racism. And then when you get into the equity piece, that's where we misunderstand what it means to redistribute power. So you may create this chief diversity officer, DEI officer, but they have no real power. You don't give them a real staff, so they're doing all the work. How can one person do all the work, right? You haven't looked at the organizational structure or culture, which should come before you even think about creating the DEI role, right? Before you even get to the diversity piece, you have to look internally to see where the gaps are, what's missing. And then you just go back to that vicious cycle, because eventually that person's gonna be like, all right, tired, burnt out, everybody's frustrated, then the cycle starts again. And so the next issue, next crisis. You see what I mean? And so then my question is, how do we get past that? How do we break that cycle? And I'm curious to hear from some of you all before I share like some questions that I think are really helpful to ask. How have you started trying to break that cycle? Or do you disagree?
So I'll say, Courtney, you need to go to MBA schools and do this presentation in every class, if you're not already here in Austin or the whole world.
Mm-hmm. I don't normally do a lot of presentations.
Well, you're rocking this one, my friend. So
yeah,
that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
And I agree. Sorry. I agree with what Joshua said. I mean, like, I think the main problem is, because when I did get my MBA, no one ever talked about this, but it's been, 15 years. But I think that the problem is that there's, this group of people who are like, okay, we need more DEI, we're all on board, but we're not the people with power who can give it over.
There you go.
And so I go to these, like I did the big training at Mission Capital, whatever, pre-pandemic, I don't even remember, 40 years ago, whatever. we were not in captivity. I went to that one, and it was just, like a bunch of people who were not in power saying, well, the only way this is going to change is if, the people at the top start giving power away. And so the bigger problem is, how do we make the people who have the power, right? How do we make them understand the value of giving it away? And I feel like we're going to be stuck in this like constant loop where we can't escape it, because, and it starts to feel really disheartening, because at an organizational, I work for a very small nonprofit, and we are all about equity in the outdoors. And so from the very beginning, we've had people of color and women and all, a very diverse group of not only participants, but board members and things like that. And so it's frustrating from that perspective to be like, well, we can do it. I don't understand what your problem is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why can't everyone see the amazing value of having so many different people at the table? I mean, it just makes for a much better organization. And so I think that's
go ahead.
Let me just, I loved what you just said, Ginny. And I find it difficult with boards sometime. If you're a leadership staff, if you're any staff, and you're trying to tell your board what they need to do, you're automatically in an awkward position. They're your bosses. So that's a problem. One of the things that I do a lot of teaching about is, and I'll do this in the next meetup in April. In South Dakota, we worked a lot in circles. Everything was done in circles because it's a Native American population up there. Even federal sentencing, criminal sentencing was done in circles by the federal government, if you can believe that. And when you work in circles, you share leadership. There's shared responsibility and shared leadership. And so it's one of the things I try to teach people, because it's a very gentle way of teaching people how to let go of some of the power. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, we don't do enough circles. That's like, usually that's people of color that's a part of like the cultures, right? Community, the collective responsibility. So yeah, I totally get that. What are you gonna say?
Also add on to that, Courtney?
Yes.
Also, it's interesting because Forbes named one of the top business trends for this decade being corporate social responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I think that overall trend hasn't reached as many people who are making leadership decisions as it could. And I think starting that and having a corporate responsibility strategy where the type of the DEI that you talk about is part of that strategy, it makes it more official. So it's not like in a crisis mode or a reactionary mode, but more about what is our corporate strategy, because some companies, it may not make sense for their culture to be working on certain community aspects, but it does make sense for them to be working on other community aspects. So they can say, well, this is where we're focused right now, or I don't know. I just feel like if there is an overall strategy that is part of what they're calling, the triple bottom line,
right,
then it's just expected to be part of how we do business.
So I will say one thing that you said that stood out, focusing on community issues, that you can create responsibility and look at culture internally, right? So it starts with the people that's in the space.
Absolutely.
Even before you go out to the community, like what type of community are you creating within your structure? And does everybody feel a part of that community? That's a big part of DEI that groups miss. So they might get it right with with community groups, but then miss and ignore and neglect the community that or the lack of community that's happening inside, right?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Good point.
Yeah. And so here's a few questions. I'm going to close with some questions that I think, it's not a few, it's quite a bit, like 10 questions that you should be thinking about when you start to create or look into DEI strategies. So the first one, are you prepared for discomfort, right? We do a lot of polite, there's a term, what was it, polite hypocrisy, where we don't want to offend or hurt anybody. We want to, show that it's not me, it's them. It's like, no, we're here. It's you too.
Yes.
And so being ready, willing, and able to lean into discomfort, your own discomfort, and recognize that and be curious about it, as opposed to becoming defensive, right? We make everything very individual when it should be collective, right? So there's like institutional racism, there's individual racism. Those two different things. We always confuse the one to go back to like, well, I'm not this, I'm not that. No one's calling you that, but you are contributing to the issue, right? 2, where are you currently? You have to do a check-in, again, individually, like where are you currently when it comes to DEI? Like be honest with yourself, do a self-assessment. And if you're not being honest, then you might as well just stop. Go back to 1, right? And then as an organization, where are you? What is your culture, your current culture? Like, what are your policies? What are your current hiring practices? Look at your staff retention. Which ones are more likely to be to leave or be let go or fired? How's the position of power? How many people of color are even in leadership roles, right? Like you have to like start to do an assessment before you can like even get into like the planning phase, right? And an honest assessment. And just because you create one role or you hire more people of color and you don't create growth opportunities, that's not DEI. That's just, again, a check box, right? And the same thing with your board, right? I'm on a board, I'm on a couple boards, and I definitely have been like that person of color. And then why do you want DEI? Like, what does it mean to you and why are y'all doing it? Are you doing it again because you feel like you need to respond to something that happened? Or are you doing because you feel like it's vital to the well-being of your organization, your community, and you want to contribute? Like you have to like decide that and understand why you're doing it. Because if you're doing it just because you feel like, oh my God, I don't want to be left out, so I need to go ahead and do this hashtag or do this statement, then again, start over, right? And then is everyone on board? Why or why not? It is so counterproductive when groups do DEI strategies and trainings, and then like leadership isn't on board. Or you have to be careful with what you say, and you can't add this in the training because it'll offend leadership. Or, so then like, what are we doing it for? Again, like, what are you doing it for? And then are you prepared for removing obstacles, including people? So how many times are you gonna like walk on eggshells for the same folks? If they're not ready to lean in, let's set up a timeline or a plan, like this is where we need to be on our individual growth scale. And then you need to think about truly the planning, because if it's the same folks doing the same thing, then you're just setting yourself up for failure, as well as those DEI roles that you're creating, right? It's just like, no way. And that part is really hard for people. And then what are you willing to speak up for? Because for some people, it's real, right? You speak out, you may run the risk of, an infraction, you're worried about your job, you're worried about being, mistreated or shunned. Like, that's real. But then what do you lose when you don't speak up, right? So you have to think about those, like, what are you willing to speak up for? And then what factors cause you to be silent? Because silence is also violence, right? Silence is also complacency. Sometimes like silence is going along with what's happening, even if it's unintentional. So you have to be aware of why you're doing these things. And you do have to pick your battles, but there are some battles that we could be fighting a little bit more, speaking up for a little bit more. But you have to really understand and assess that, and again, individually and as a collective. And then what's your plan? And that's personal. And so personal is really you. So I feel like when we do these things like DEI for organization, we forget that you as an individual should be working on this as well. So where are you individually? And then what can you as an organization do now? That's like the short term. And then how do you build that short term planning up for the long haul, right? So if you jump to the long haul, like for example, hiring someone, that to me is a long-term goal. If you haven't really set up a culture or an environment that will allow that person to thrive, then what you should be working on is how do we create an environment that's set up for people to be successful, no matter their background, right? And how do we create an environment where we're not tokenizing or burning out an individual, right? And setting them up to fail and setting them up for the fall, and setting up ourselves up for the fall, right? So you have to really think that out. And then what is success? What is failure? And how do you know the difference? Mm-hmm. So just because you bring in a diversity role on your board or on your staff or what have you, is that truly success if the person is struggling? If you aren't understanding this person's identity and what they bring to the table, if they're having to always be that voice that speaks out and be the bad guy. I'm tired of being the angry Black woman, but that's what ends up happening. Like I have to be the one that's confrontational because I'm looking at things from a different lens. And I've been told, you know, oh, this is what we hired you for. Then that's not fair to me. It is not fair. So that's a fail to me. That's a fail. And then commitment. Are you in it for the long haul? Because it is a process. It's a process. You are transforming how you move as an organization, how you move individually. And that's some real hard work, you know, and that goes back to being prepared for discomfort. It's not cute. It's not, you know, it's going to be tough. And so are you prepared for that? You know, and so if you have a 6-month plan, can you extend that? You know, let's go to your 5-year plan. So, you know, that's how long of a haul it is, right? And even longer for some. And so I'll stop there because I know Paulina and Mickey are going to go into more details. But this is just what I want you to leave you with to, you know, ponder these thoughts. And once you can answer those 10 questions, that's how you can move from it being like just a buzzword and something fashionable to something that's really sustainable and transformational. That's all I have for you. Thank you.
Okay, Courtney, wonderful job. Can you stop sharing your screen though? Yep. There you go. All right. Okay, wow, that was fantastic. I feel very lucky. Thank you. Paulina, are you ready to go?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about yourself too before you begin.
Sure, of course. Well, I'm Paulina Artieda, the Executive Director of the New Philanthropists. And, you know, honestly, I gotta quickly say that Courtney, I mean, wow, like she has given and provided nothing but amazing, true transformational strategies for all of us to listen to, which really leads us into the type of work that the New Philanthropist does. And what we do is just definitely to help nonprofits and leaders of color come together and, you know, and change that systemic, dismantle that systemic situation and structure of not having representation at the table. So I know someone else brought up, you know, like, how do we get leaders? How do we get the people at the top to change? Well, it does take commitment. It does take a journey. And so the New Philanthropist was really formed around how we can help Austin nonprofit boards become more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And that really comes from a place of helping them better serve their missions to the communities that they serve, because we know that when there isn't representation, when there isn't the cultural insights and the people at the table that are the closest to those communities that have that lived experience, then those communities are not being served properly. So that's a little bit about the New Philanthropist. The bigger problem at hand, though, the reason why we exist is because, I mean, there was a national survey done by, a report done by Board Source in 2017, Leading with Intent. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but it noted that across, you know, nationwide, 84% of boards are made up of board members are reporting as Caucasian. And 84%, so that's a significant number. And then when you look at, I think the Annie Casey Foundation put out that 60% of national nonprofits serve populations of color, then you really kind of start seeing that diversity gap that exists on our leadership side, right? And so for that reason, we've come in and, I think one of the first questions that a lot of people have around this work is, well, why do better boards matter, right? What is the benefit of diversifying your board? What is the reason why that this is so important? And, like Courtney mentioned earlier, diversity can be very much more optical, right? A lot of people are looking for the quick fire strategies. They're looking for, okay, I just need to, get people on my board that come from different races and we're good, right? Well, unfortunately, we didn't get to this place to quickly undo anything. There's going to be work and commitment involved, and diversity can be optical, and that's not going to be sustainable for your board or for, even your staff. What we need to do is really take a look at the policies, the practices, but most importantly, the DNA and the culture that exists on your board level, your leadership level, and what are you doing very much unintentionally can be a part of a bigger structure, systemic structure that's been in place within the nonprofit sector, right? So when it comes to just kind of answering that question, so why do better boards matter? We know that effective nonprofits, they advance public good. And we know that those effective nonprofits are effective because they have effective boards. And we know that effective boards are actually diverse boards. And when you have a diverse board, you have more engaged board members, which means that really, you're coming to the table, you're showing up to really understand the communities that you're serving and how their lives are being impacted. So you're more engaged in a sense of that lived experience coming to the table. You have more informed decision-making. You have more effective services and programs. We know that governance has a big, impact on how programs and different services are cut sometimes or offered. And you even have a wider net for donors, volunteers, and advocates. So, but one thing that stands out to me the most is that you have your cultural missteps. And that's a big piece of this. The last thing nonprofits need are those bad headlines, right? When something goes wrong when it comes to a cultural misstep. And so it's important to know that the trust that you will lose, the impact that you will have on even the communities that you're serving due to a cultural misstep can be pretty, it can be traumatic as well for them, or even within your own board culture, it can be traumatic. So how do we create inclusive cultures where everyone is thriving, where everyone gets a seat at the table, and where power is shared, right? There's those characteristics that come into play. So with the New Philanthropists, we have programs that help nonprofits go through that process. And I will tell you, I'm just echoing everything Courtney here said, the commitment is a big piece of that. Our programming only accepts nonprofits that have 100% participation. And why is that? Because we know that when we only do half of the board that goes through our program, then the other half is just holding the process and the transformation back from really fulfilling itself. And so we have 100% commitment, and a lot of the programming we do, it starts off with an assessment, just as Courtney mentioned. It is important to not only understand that this is a journey for yourself personally, and then also collectively as a board. And so the work begins with you. And when we say it begins with you, it goes even back to home, right? Home is where a lot of the work gets done. I would always, have you question, like, what books are you reading? Who are the authors? What art do you have on your wall? What experiences, what TV are you watching? Are they all coming from the same type of dominant culture? Or do you have a variety of authors and, artists on your walls that you really explored and sat and understood where they're coming from? And even to say, how are you involved in the community personally and as an organization? How are you diversifying your dollar? Are you giving Black businesses, Latino businesses, Asian businesses also your money and diversifying your, so DEI is not just, absolutely not a buzzword. It is a lifestyle. It is who you are. It is a part of a cultural shift that happens within that you bring onto your leadership, that you bring onto the table. And so through the assessment piece, you really gain to understand where you're at now, a baseline, so you can work towards becoming better. You can work towards being more involved and being more committed to changing these systemic, in a sense, practices and policies. So the journey's long. It's not meant to be, again, we're not going to sit here and undo what has been a part of culture for so long, what we call disrupting norms. But I think, one piece that was even highlighted is that you're gonna be discouraged. It's gonna be uncomfortable. It's not gonna be fun, but you do have to have a plan, absolutely. And you do have to have some success indicators along the way. One of the ones that we suggest is, how do we build a common language around DEI? What is our statements? What is our definitions for diversity, equity, and inclusion for our organization? How do we exemplify that? When we say we welcome all, what does that mean when it comes to our marketing? What does that mean when it comes to our language and our content? Who are we missing? And so I always push a lot of organizations when they're at the very beginning of this process to have a listening tour. Do a listening tour in the community, and really gain a perspective of what others see when they hear your name, or if they've never heard your name, why. And just kind of gain that perspective from the outside of what it means to what your mission means to them, even, and why are they trusting you and why are they not. And I think that will really help you understand that what you've been maybe putting out there is either very effective or has completely missed communities of color, or just communities in general that just are not even aware that you're there because you haven't really invited them in. A lot of people think that the communities will come to you. No, it's really much more the opposite. It's building relationships. It's about building relationships and you really introducing yourself to the communities, and your board should be 100% involved in that process of that, of what you are putting out there as an organization. So those are some of the policies and practices that, we highlight. But I think, in general also is just, how do we make sure this is a sustainable plan for you? Where there might be board members that come and go. We are working with an organization right now where there were people that just refused to do the assessment piece of the work, and unfortunately they're just no longer on the board. And it's unfortunately for them, but it's an opportunity for those that stayed on and are going to do the work, and for any other people that are going to join them in the future, right? Because once that becomes a staple, the way you are integrating into your DNA, I guess you could say, DEI, practices and values, then there's really no turning back. There's no turning back once that becomes a practice and a value that you inhabit at all times. So I will say for sure that, as you go through this journey, you make room for places where you can have, or situations where you can have safe conversations, providing space for even people of color to come and show up authentically. So around that piece, we live in a culture of assimilation that you have to come and, in a sense, become a part of the culture that's there. But that really puts a strain on people of color to having to even code switch sometimes, right? And not being able to show up authentically as who they are, because, there's always going to be, in a sense, if you're the only person of color that goes into a room, you're always going to be on edge about those things. So creating a space where everyone can show up authentically and not necessarily have to assimilate to norms is a starting point for a lot of organizations of how do we make this much more of an inclusive environment for everyone. So you're probably asking, how does this happen? How do we, it's an evolving process. It's definitely a place where practices are being not only examined, but also new practices are being held accountable by everyone in that board. I want to open it up to questions in case, I know I've been talking for a little bit, but if there's any questions out there right now from anything I've said.
I actually have a question, if that's okay. This is Nancy. So let me understand. If you're a nonprofit board and you want to begin the process of diversity, equity, and inclusion, they would come to you and you would walk them through. You have a set program. And it starts with the assessment. What are some of the other pieces of that they do that you help them with?
Sure. So we have two programs right now. One's called the First Look program, and that's really much more of in a sense, a starter program for any organization that's done maybe a little bit of work in DEI space, but really needs to gain more of a grip on how they can begin a plan around it. And so the First Look assessment program really will sit there and have everyone go through an assessment on their own, and then we'll come in and do an assessment as a group for the whole board. So you have your own individual assessment, you have your board assessment, and you have some strategies that come out of that. And with that, we would also do a recruitment workshop. And so that recruitment workshop is really going to look at the practices of what are your recruiting methods now. And most of the time, recruiting methods mean the referral system, right? Which does not help diversity at all. Recruitment systems are just bringing in the same people, whether it's colleagues, whether it's your best friends, into the circle, so you're not getting different lived experiences when they all come from the same circle. So we look at your recruitment methods and really start to outline the pain points that you're having from what is it that you're lacking here to bring diversity, equity, inclusion into your recruiting plan, and find those opportunities. We identify that for you. And from that point on, you continue to work in that direction with some set strategies. Now, there's a more thorough plan that we have. It's called the Diversity and Inclusion Planning Program. We have right now an organization going through that. It's a 2-year program they're going to go through with us. And that plan has the assessment, has the recruitment workshop, but we also hold accountable a group. Usually it's the governance group that we go through and look at how do we make these discussions a part of your everyday board meeting? How do we make practices a part, DI practices a part of your culture? And so that's where we really examine policy. We examine, how does onboarding take place when it comes to board members? Is that even, how do we have a lens of DEI through that? So we go through all the practices and we build a recruitment plan, a more thorough recruitment plan that definitely helps nonprofits get to a place where a match can get made. And so we would help you match with leaders of color at the end of that process and have them go through a relationship building type of model where we bring on a new board member or members.
Wow, that's a lot.
Real quick, I know Cynthia's had her hand up for a little bit here.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Paulina and Courtney. So wonderful to have this conversation. I feel like there's so much I want to ask, but the two big questions I have are for both of you actually, and I feel like they're probably not easy answers. I don't think there are any easy answers, right? But I'm familiar, Paulina, with what y'all do. We've talked, and I love what y'all do, and I want to get my board there so bad. I'm one of those people that is the woman of color in that position, and there's not a lot of other people like me around me, and that's okay. I'm comfortable with that. It's been my life story. But my real question is, I have some allies on the board that I know would be receptive. I know that there are people that care about this, and obviously I'm passionate about it. But I'm also, to your points, Courtney, really struggling with some of those questions you put out. And I really appreciate you putting them so clearly, because it's hard to confront them, especially when you have so much else going on. I mean, my first year as a CEO was a COVID year, and we are tripling our agency size, like we're in a growth period. So it's a lot, to put this in, but it really is important to me. And so my question is this. When you have that kind of situation, which I think a lot of people do, they'll have a couple people on the board that are completely gung-ho, and they'll have a couple people maybe they're afraid to talk to, or for a lot of different reasons. I want to know, do you have any just single advice that would be like, how do you get your board to that place of 100% commitment to where we can go into these programs, to where we can take those big steps together and we can have, an honest effort at it? That I know it's not an easy question. I just want to know, is there any small step that I can take now? I think my only inkling is that I can, get over my own fear and just start, confronting people with it, or maybe one-on-one. I feel like when things happen in a board meeting, they're not effective. And so I have talked to some people one-on-one. other people, it's easier not to, make that a priority because that the conversation is going to be more uncomfortable. But I really want to do this. So I just wonder, do you have any advice, like really for me and people like me that are trying to get the whole board there? Because I think you have to have that, like you said, Paulina, you have to have that. How do you get it there beyond people just saying like, oh yeah, we care, but we're not going to do anything about it?
And then just a quick note here. I want to make sure we give Mickey his 20 minutes. So let's watch the time. And who would you want to answer that question, Miss Cynthia?
Anyone that has anything to say about it, because I don't have the answers. Anyone that wants to jump in?
Yeah, well, I can answer. So one, there's like several things you can do. I think what you're doing in terms of meeting individually with board members and building the allies, your allies, is 100% awesome. Yes, please do that, because the more people that feel this is important, the more that you can come together to the board and say, no, we want to do this. Secondly, you can get us to go present to your board. It's always great to bring in a third person outside, and we will do a presentation to help understand the benefits of that, of diversity. And the third piece I have is, and this is something that's becoming a reality for many foundations and funders. They are starting to require for board demographics to be reported as part of funding, as part of grant. And so putting that knowledge out there that you can't put this on the back burner anymore. We need to start working at this, because it might at the end of the day affect the funding you get, is an important piece, but also data is always good. Like, okay, if you are serving people of color and you really need to understand what they're going through and what their needs are, how does this group and this that we have here today, how do they know how to answer that if they don't have any cultural connections, representations, lived experience for that group? How do you better serve them? And so those are the type of data, I would say, that just obvious statements that are there.
Thank you so much. It's really helpful.
Thanks, you guys. Okay, Mickey, I'd love to have you introduce yourself and tell the folks a little bit more about yourself.
Well, first, got to say that I'm completely horrified that I have to follow Courtney and Paulina, and that they've completely obliterated almost anything that I've had to say at this point. I'm almost tempted to say class dismissed, but I think that probably wouldn't be very fair. And I have to add, Austin, I was only in Austin once a few years ago, but I'm really jealous of your barbecue and your blues scene. So I need to get back there at some point whenever it's safe to do so. I'm Mickey Desai. I have had this really weird career that has wound into and out of the nonprofit sector, into and out of the corporate sector. I have a company called the Nonprofit Snapshot, which is a micro assessment of a nonprofit's management practices. I'm about to turn that into an app and go to alpha test probably next week. Actually, we're going to start testing proof of concept within the next few days. To supplement that, I started at the time, and at the time, I mean, back in 2008 was when all this started, but I have this podcast called the Nonprofit Snapcast, which in the last 2.5 years has completely taken on a life of its own. And that's how Nancy and I originally met, doing the Snapcast, always looking for guests who want to tell stories related to nonprofit management and things like that. So if anybody wants to join me in that endeavor and be a guest on the show, I'd really appreciate that. Also, exactly the topic that we've been talking about, I have another podcast that I work on called Inclusion Catalyst. We're in the process of decentralizing the Inclusion Catalyst podcast so that anyone can host their own episode. And if you're interested in doing that sort of thing and telling an episode on behalf of your own agency or your own self even, go to inclusioncatalyst.com or find me. And in fact, what I'll do right now is to put my LinkedIn link in the chat, and I welcome a contact from everybody and anyone who's interested in talking about, or if you just want to get connected, I'm always happy to just be connected. So that's the LinkedIn. That's the LinkedIn link. You've heard me talk about Inclusion Catalyst, and I do a lot in the podcasting world these days anyway. It's just sort of turned into my dream job. So, but I'll be quiet now about those kinds of things and talk more about the topic at hand, which is to simply echo a lot of the stuff that Courtney and Paulina have already addressed. And I've put together a blog piece, which I'm riffing off of at the moment, to talk about concrete things we can do with our nonprofit boards to change the actual culture, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here when we talk about changing a lifestyle, you have to address the root causes of changing a culture so that the change that you're trying to make sort of becomes transparent at some point, right? I think that's the overall goal. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I could be very wrong about that, so the way I think the process should unfold goes like this. We're talking 8 steps and actually 7 steps and a useful hint, if I'm being honest. So the first step, as we've mentioned before, is to assess the current status of your board. Never take your eyes off the skill areas that the board needs. Do the standard skills assessment. We've all done them for our boards. But as you do the board assessment, run a diversity audit at the same time to see how your board stacks up, and maybe also your entire organization, not just the board, right? But see how they stack up. Look at the demographic of the board, then compare that to the demographic of the community that you serve. Those 2 pie charts should match as closely as possible. What groups are underrepresented in any area, right? That's the kind of thing that talks about the changes that you want to make. And it's not always about race. It's about age, it's about disabilities, it's about gender neutrality. All of these dimensions should be looked at as you try to tackle your own diversity picture. Once you have that assessment down, and once you have the board diversity audit down, take a good hard look at what lies under the surface. This is exactly what Courtney was talking about having those uncomfortable conversations and making changes to the way we think about who we relate to and how we relate to them. I have a note here on my own blog that says, if the conversation is comfortable, you're doing it wrong. And so the thing you want to look at there is are people on the board ready to listen to and welcome different points of view and move away from this is the way we've always done it, mode of thinking. Don't assume everyone agrees about what diversity inclusion means. Boards must ask, why do we even need to become diverse? What's the purpose of all that? The questions that you guys should seek to answer when you're doing this thing, when you're having these uncomfortable conversations are people of color or young people or disabled people, are they comfortable serving on the board? Does the board consider issues relating to race and ethnicity when it sets policies and makes decisions for the organization? What could the board do differently to become more inclusive and welcoming? And that's where a consultant may come in to help give some pointers for that sort of thing. And what could the board do differently to address the needs of their diverse communities? Those are, I think, very programmatically related issues that are easily addressed by the people once you have a diverse board, they get much easier to tackle. The third point is make a plan and get everyone involved. This is an opportunity for board growth and development, right? So ideally, making these changes should be something of a celebration and not so much of a headache, if you can frame it in those terms. You get a pipeline of candidates and target skills, not colors, right? Like Courtney said, and like Paulina said, we're here to avoid tokenism. So, be open about your organization's current level of diversity when you're doing your recruiting. People want to feel like you're recruiting them because of their skills and not because of the way they look. So focus on those skills and talents for your ideal candidate, but prioritize those who are underrepresented in the name of equity. I'm reminded of a time when I was helping the Carter Center out and their intern program. It wasn't a diversity issue, but I'm hoping you'll find the comparison that I'm about to make useful. The Carter Center has this relationship with Emory University. They wanted to make sure that Emory University students had more of an opportunity to become interns than the people from the rest of the world, right? So how did they do that? They disproportionately spent more money marketing the internships to Emory University than they did to the rest of the world. And that's how they got their pie chart to look the way it looked. And in this case, when you're making a plan to get everyone involved, once you've identified promising candidates, you have to go to where those candidates are in order to find them. And maybe Courtney and Paulina can say more about this when we do Q&A, but you're not just filling a quota, you're changing a culture. And to change a culture, you have to put yourself into the place where that culture, when you can meet those elements that get blended into your culture. Am I out of place by saying that? But in the end, all board members get treated equally and with the same respect from everyone. That's your goal, to target skills, not colors. Be proactive. So yes, you should comb through your Rolodex. You should start grooming prospects, but there's a potential pitfall here. People tend to know people who are similar to themselves, right? You have to reach out farther to keep the board from remaining homogenous. There are additional ways you can expand your reach. So post on websites like idealist.org or createthegood.org, and take advantage of LinkedIn's targeted options as well to do your board recruiting. Blast your social media accounts with the open position and ask your employees and your other stakeholders to do the same. Ask local organizations or associations who work with those communities for recruiting assistance. You'll be surprised how open they are to doing that kind of thing if they can develop partnerships. And while you're at it, what is the racial equity policy around your board recruitment? There should be an actual policy. If you haven't made one, you should put one down on paper. Is everyone on board with it? And include a statement of inclusivity on your next job post or board posting. In fact, you probably should put that on your website, on the About Us page somewhere. And remember that board giving requirements can be a barrier for people. So take that into account when you're doing your recruiting, and maybe change some of those policies too. Board giving requirements is a topic we could spend an entire day talking about, so I'll just leave that one right where it is. Number 5, take the opportunity to do informal reassessments whenever you need it. Monitor and measure your progress along these lines. Always compare current state to the ideal state and figure out, always be, moving your strategy to figure out how you can get there. Number 6, make a diversity a part of your mission and not just your mission statement. An explicit commitment to diversity should be made readily available on your website, right, along with the other policies that we've mentioned so far. So I think that that's something that nonprofits should do openly. Number 7, ask your members what's up. Ask the people who are served by your nonprofit who they would actually recommend as board members. They'll have community folks that they think should be on your board, and they probably should actually be on your board. So don't be afraid to reach out to your actual service populations to figure out who they think should be represented on your board. They need a voice in the decisions that affect them. Number 8 is sort of the tip. If you're using a search firm or a consultant, tell that consultant or the search firm that every candidate that appears to make the qualifications sought, so every candidate that they bring to your board for consideration, they should also bring a board candidate who the consultant thinks is totally different than what the nonprofit is looking for. I hope that makes sense. It's sort of a mental exercise, right? So this is what I try to do when I'm the consultant. The objective here is not to defeat the patterns. Sorry, the objective here is to defeat the patterns that result in homogeneity, and it helps the consultant from reinforcing those old patterns as a means of unconsciously keeping their clients happy, right? So you can break that tendency by telling them, bring me someone who you think that I don't want for my board. And having dragged us through the topic by the hair, I'm going to stop right there.
That's funny. Hey, well, here's what I want to do. I want to do an official question and answer for all of you 3 speakers. But I got to share my screen again. And while I'm getting my screen shared again, I just want to add, let's see. There's a woman, Sharon Rush. She is, she signed up for today. I don't see her in the participant list. But,
she's here.
oh, is she? Okay.
Oh, no, Sharon Lowe is here, but Sharon Rush is not.
Okay. Sharon is executive director at Nobility, Nobility. And she wanted to mention something that Mickey just said, that we sometimes forget, that when we're talking about diversity, that it also includes people of other abilities, and in their organization. I'm not going to pretend that I know their mission exactly, but she wanted me to mention that a lot of nonprofits don't even have their websites accessible to people that have disabilities. And that's what Nobility does, is they help you create accessibility on your websites.
And I have helped nonprofits do that. I have helped, there's really inexpensive, easy ways to make your websites ADA compliant. And
yes.
And I'm happy to share my knowledge with folks if that becomes a question for them too.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think we forget about that easily. So yeah, she wanted me to mention that. Good. Okay. So what other questions might you folks have for our speakers? And I don't think I can.
Are we raising hands or chatting?
Well, I can't get to my chat apparently when I have my screen shared.
I've got
something new every time. Do you have it, Mickey? Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to moderate if you'd like to. So whichever way is convenient, raise your hand, do the chat thing, whatever. I've got the entire world in front of me right here.
Josh.
Who's first? Josh?
Okay, question. So I'm caught up on the phrase, go find board members to help diversify your board, your organization. So this is for all of you. When I say caught up in that, I mean, I'm hearing almost simultaneous concepts from our speakers today, which are all fabulous, but I'm just letting you know what I'm trying to internalize and make the most of just this. So diversity, inclusion, your board needs to, and Mickey is doing, I think, a nice job of getting me closer to understanding that, find the skills, then from there, look within, see if they're, the people you have identified who meet that skill set, how can you add diversity to your board? So that kind of helps.
Josh, you're breaking up.
Sorry. I'll chat it. I'll chat it.
Can you hear me, Mickey?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I think he was, well, I'll let him do it.
Yeah, it's coming.
I'm going to stop this share so that I can see the chat.
There we go. I see Cynthia. Cynthia, go for it.
I have another hard question, if I may, but I just wonder if anyone has thoughts. I hope we get there where we have, this wonderful pool of folks that we can pull from and bring in. But I do think about one thing that stood out when y'all were talking is how to make the culture more inclusive. Like, I think that's a harder question almost in my mind. Because I'm used to being the only person of color in a lot of rooms. I feel like, you learn that skill set or you try to, learn coping mechanisms for it. But I wonder, like, what could I do assertively in my role to make our culture more inclusive and more welcoming to folks? Because I do worry about, just the fact of, like, we could find people, could encourage, I can engage people easily, but I don't know about easily, but I mean, I can engage people. I don't know if I can get them here, but if I can get them here, I'm really worried about that part too. Like, not everybody is going to have, the same outlook as I do. Like, what affirmative steps can we take? Could you speak anyone a little bit on, like, just, real life steps that we could take to do that, to move towards that?
I can give you an example. And I also want to go back to what you asked earlier too, with the allyship thing, question. I think transitioning even further from allyship to, like, co-conspiratorship, like someone who's willing to step in in front of you and speak up when they know that people who are more vulnerable could be punished or ignored, then you take that hit, right? So I'll give you an example. So leadership loss is interesting. Our board is super diverse. Our staff, not yet. I am, like, our first person of color executive, right? And so it's been challenging because I lean in hard. Like, this is what you hired me for, so this is what we're going to do. Let's talk about it. And with our board, one of the things that we've implemented recently, after having a big, I guess, I was gonna say blowout, not a blowout, but a really emotional conversation with the board where I just let people have it. I was like, we always say it's them, not us, but you all are the issue too. And here's why. And then we went and we just had, like, a round table conversation where everyone got to share out. It was particularly the board members of color, what they were feeling. And one, as a staff member, the only staff member of color, is validated my feelings of having to carry the load. And that's wherever I've gone. I've had to carry the load. Just in Austin, that's just how it feels sometimes. And now thankfully I'm in an organization where I can speak out and I don't fear any punishment or backlash. But it still gets frustrating, right? And so now our board is having this discussion about our values. Like, it sounds very simple, but it is a DEI conversation. One, do our values, like, what do they mean? Like, it's community trusteeship, inclusion, personal responsibility, and there is one I am missing. Collaboration. But what do they really mean, and why are we saying them? And do we need to do an overhaul on those values? And so it's been like a back and forth conversation. So instead of having a board meetings where we're talking about just going through the budget and all this stuff, like, we're just allotting time, like a good chunk of the board meeting, like 45 minutes or so, to just hash it out. And it gets rough. Folks have turned off their, because people are bold now because we're in Zoom. So it's like, I'm shut this down, right? Doing things that they wouldn't do in person, but that's showing you who they really are. Like, oh, this isn't how you presented before. And so we're having these tough conversations. We have somebody on our executive, I guess, team for our board, people of color on there. So I found a co-conspirator and I said, hey, this is something that I've been dealing with. Can you speak up? Can you vouch? They asked. So I didn't speak, but they asked me, like, how can I support you? I said, this is what I need. I need you to speak up in the meetings. And I need you to say what I can't say. And then they did it, right? And then things started happening because it's not just always me saying it. But when it's always me, then it's easy for people to ignore it, right? Because like, oh God, here go Courtney again. Oh my God, all right, Courtney, the DEI champion, here we go. And it's like, no. But then when someone else said it, it was like, oh. And other people started saying it, like not just one person, but multiple people. Then we started seeing a shift. And so like, just that simple step, like if someone wants to be your ally or your co-conspirator, then say, show me.
I love that. Thank you.
Right?
I have a potential
I think
answer.
I answered, yeah.
Thank you.
I have a potential answer here as well. I think I would add to that in engaging with your board members and potentially new board members is a little bit like dating. It's a trial and error process that allows you to gauge who you want to be with and who you don't want to be with. And so you have to figure out how open they are to the same things that you're open to, right? And in a board world, in dating, it's do they like pineapple on pizza? In a board context, it's can we make the building ADA compliant, or can we make sure that the board is at least 50% people of color? Things like that. But it's the same thing. You just have to decide what those dimensions are and be prepared for the trial and error process of chewing through your choices and making the right decisions who gets to join you at the board. But another piece of this puzzle, another piece of this equation, I think, is I've worked on boards that try to define what it means to actually be a good board member, right? And we've given board members a menu of things that they should be doing during their tenure. So there would be like literally a section on the menu that's appetizers, and it's things like give me 20 names of people I should call, plan an event, or whatever. So there's appetizers, there's the main course, and then there's desserts. And every board member has to choose at least one thing from each of those sections. And in those selections, you could also put things that are related to D&I and inclusion, equity and inclusion, right? And make sure that it's part of the language that you're using as you relate to those board members as you try to date them, right?
Good.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
Okay, what about this question? Can you see it in the chat from
I've got
Josh?
it.
Okay.
You want me to read it? Shall I read it? Okay.
Yes, please.
Josh asked, how do I discern from the notion of intentionally finding someone of color / diverse background versus finding people with skill sets, then within the people who meet the skill sets, finding people of color / diverse background? That's a very good question.
Well, I can answer that. Well, first, do not intentionally go find someone of color. Don't do that, for sure.
Right.
I will definitely say that one thing that we promote is how to build relationships with other communities, with other even affinity groups, and not build relationships out of pure vanity to bring a board member in, but of really how can you, coordinate your missions, the mission you have, in a sense, how you can contribute and be a part of the progress of that affinity group. How do you show up, but show up intentionally to be a part of what they have to offer, and start building those relationships. It's just like how you build relationships, like, Mickey was saying, a relationship, Matt, dating. Like, you don't necessarily go and say, I want to date you, let's date. You really have to want to get to know the person, have to really understand where you guys cross roads, what challenges you meet, what is it that you can offer to the party and they can offer back to you. It's different in instances like that. But I think there has to be a genuine approach, a genuine interest, a genuine knowledge that you're wanting to build a relationship with affinity groups or communities or organizations, because you want to learn from them and you really want to understand who you can, in a sense, match with to bring onto your board that has that lived experience that you're seeking as well, right?
And I would
Can
say,
I add, okay.
I'm sorry, Courtney, please.
I was going to say with the skill set conversation, I've seen that like backfire too, where some groups who aren't ready, they'll use that like, well, there aren't people out there. We don't have folks out there. And then what you can push back when they say that, like, oh, we put something out there and we just didn't find people who feel that skill set. You can push back and say, well, where did you put it? Where did you post?
Yeah.
And so, especially if you want lived experience, and you truly want diversity, whether it's abilities, incomes, education, did you post in community boards? Did you go into the community spaces? Because not everybody is on the internet, right? Even now, right? So especially when we're in the physical space, like community boards and getting on people's like agendas and talking to them, like meeting them where they are and talking to them in a way, not to sell something, but like Paulina said, to build the relationship and allowing them to ask you questions and to challenge, or putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation where you're on their agenda. That's how you build a relationship, and that's how you reach more diverse groups. Like you go outside your normal practices, right? And so if you're posting just on the typical job boards, then think about other areas where people look, right? And so I would say that's really important. And then, you know, again, like reassessing. What do you mean when you say these skill sets? When you write out the skill sets, do they translate? Like, do they make sense to the everyday person? Are you just writing like cute little catchwords and things that, like, how do you really simplify what you're looking for?
I would add to that, and I'm going to pose this question to Paulina and Courtney, but I wanted to ad lib off of what Josh just says. Was it sounds like an organic community building process, and it is. I think it should be one that's also fairly transparent. Courtney, Paulina, what do you think about someone like me? Because I'm not a white person, right? I'm a brown person. But I'm still, I think, in a kind of privileged position, having been a board leader for many, many years. I know what, you know, boards do and how they operate. I've been on that side of the equation forever and ever. But what about me walking up to another person of color to say, hey, look, we're trying to diversify our board. Should that level of transparency be part of the board recruiting process? What do you guys think?
I think so, because then that allows that person to ask you questions too. Because if you say that to me, I'm trying to diversify my board, then I'm like, are you trying to tokenize me? Like, there's a conversation. So when you do that, that allows for conversation. But I do think you should be transparent to let that person know what they're walking into. Right?
Absolutely. I would agree. You have to be transparent and be ready to be uncomfortable, because they might ask you, so are you coming to me because you're tokenizing me?
Yeah, right.
I think that's where you really have to elaborate on that too. Like, look, we want people with lived experience. We want people to really represent those communities. And so this is a sustainable effort that we're doing. We're not here. Yeah. We also want you to be open about any of those concerns that you have about, you know, sit down and really get to know our board and get to know our culture, because we're really here to welcome new faces and really have them become a part of a better culture on our board. So I think the more transparent you can be, the better.
Right. And put it, as Josh said, and put it into a building community context to say, yeah, you know, are you here because I'm Black? I'm like, not entirely. I'm here because you're a kick-ass finance mind and we need that on our board. Right. So,
right. So I need to start winding down, but there's a couple of things I have to say. Wait a minute, I got to stop this share again. You'd think I'd learn this. No, I can share again. First of all, this has been the most interesting meetup, and I think we could do this for a half day, easy. We could do this on create a circle environment in a virtual environment, and start with, as Paulina suggested, our own assessments personally, like go around in that circle, and then our board. And I think to answer Cynthia's question, that part of that process would be involving, you'd bring one of your board members with you, that ally, that co-conspirator. I call them board buddies. That one person on your board who you can really talk to, who really respects you. You bring that person into this circle. So, and that's your beginning. And like Courtney said, this is a long process. So I'm just thrilled with what we did today. I'd like to keep going. but I want to be respectful and mindful of everybody's time. I just want to show you what's coming up in April. We go back to resource development, and I want you guys to know I took a lot of notes today, which I usually don't do, because I think what I want to do when I go back to my resource development meetup in April, I want to incorporate some of what we've talked about here today, because everything we do should involve DEI. Every single one of our focus areas that we address in this meetup from now on, I'm going to commit to that, we're going to use that lens. Okay. So you guys can hold me to that. If I mess it up, you'll tell me. All right. And this is what we're doing in April. In the Facebook group, we have Cynthia, who was here today, talking about her virtual fundraising event experiences. I will do a live video. And then we have Jaden Beatty from Austin Groups for the Elderly, who's going to do data and dollars. So make sure and come to that, April 15th. And this is just, if you need anything, go to my website, powermission.com, click on Contact Us, book a free strategy call with me. I love talking to people, and I have people in this meetup today who know I enjoy this. I really want to thank you, Joshua. Thank you too for jumping in with Courtney's first question. I got scared that nobody was going to jump in. And it reminded me that sometimes as a presenter, I don't do what Courtney did, and I want to do more. I want to commit to doing more of that. And that is engaging you more, asking those questions and getting more of your feedback and input, because it makes it better. And I'm very grateful to all of you who pitched in today, and grateful to our speakers taking their time, and Mickey from all the way over in, where are you, Georgia?
You're in Georgia.
Yeah. So
who else is in Georgia? Anybody else?
I'm from Georgia.
Oh, okay.
But
yeah, good old Atlanta.
We had one person sign up from Colorado, but is going to listen later. So does anybody else have one more quick, Paulina?
I just wanted to say thank you everybody for coming today, and if you feel you support our work and you feel inclined to push any donations to the New Philanthropists, I'm going to post the link on the chat, as well as Courtney and Mickey. I know you guys have your own organizations. That's just a way we can support to continue having these conversations and bringing this knowledge. I know what we bring to the table is something that we really are heartfelt about, and we know that we can do this all together. We cannot do this work alone. So
thank you for saying that, Paulina. Like, definitely reach out to us. We can put our emails in the link, and Nancy, if you could share our emails if you want to learn more about DEI efforts that we're doing. If you want to learn about Leadership Austin, reach out to us. Don't let this be a one and done, and support what we do.
Yep. Please do reach out to me via that LinkedIn link I put in chat earlier. I'm happy to talk to anyone at any time. Just drop me a line.
Rob, thank you for mentioning it. Jaden's with Age of Central Texas. I'll change that on the slide for sure, especially when I promote her. That's always a good thing to know. All right. And then we have Courtney's email in the chat as well. And when I get the recording of this, it's not going to have the chat. So I'll try to download the chat separately and send that to you too. All right. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate everybody's input and help and expertise.
Thanks for the opportunity, Nancy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.